Oh, well, good morning. Good morning to you, George. How you doing?
Good morning. Yeah.
Doing well. Co-hosting with us this morning is Jeremy Elwood. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, very well. We have got a fun conversation and a fun show going today. We are going to be talking the sheriffs of New Zealand shortly with Dylan Reeve. We're going to have a bit of a whinge about daylight. That seems to be a thing now. Seems to be a new thing that everyone's bitching about daylight savings. I'm not sure why, but seems to be a bit of a new thing. I also have an opinion that I think it's slightly there's a slight North Island bias coming up, and as someone based in Auckland, Jeremy, you can confirm or deny for that a bit later on, maybe.
Sure.
What else are we going to be talking about today? I've already forgotten about all that stuff we're talking about. Oh, also, yeah, I noticed that BK in the UK, London, have opened a vegan restaurant, which is 100% vegan. So it's like BK vegan, and everything in there is plant-based. I think that's a really interesting concept. I wanted to talk about it. So we've got a guest coming on who I've already spoken to this morning, who is the owner and operator of a vegan burger joint here in Dunedin. Because I'm like, cool. There's a couple of things here. They're like, when the warehouse moves into a small town, all of a sudden all those small shops shut down because they can't compete. How does someone or a company with an ideology of wanting to get the style of eating out there for various reasons feel about the kind of big boys coming in versus is it good to get the message out there to more people? So we'll have a bit of a chat about that with Tom White between now and the top of the hour. And also, Jeremy, I want to talk to you at some stage because we did a lot on Chris Rock and that other guy, whatever his name was, last week. But you are a stand-up comedian, and everyone's talking about jokes don't matter. I think what better than get your perspective on that? We might do that a bit later on today, as well as maybe some perspective
sounds good.
From some other comedians as well, who have been happily sharing their thoughts over the weekend.
Yeah, because no one's been talking about that at all, so that's good. We'll chat about that.
No, as we said last week, it was obviously going to be the biggest news story in the world last week, but it was far from the most important. But we'll just maybe wrap up with that with some more conversations today. Anything from you two? Anything going on, George? Anything? I've been watching George chasing flies around his room for the last half hour, having to get them out. It's been a fun sport, so we might watch a bit more of that. What about you, Jeremy? We haven't had you on for a wee bit. You've been good. Things rocking along.
Yeah, been okay. Things are okay. Funnily enough, you'd mentioned the flies. We've suddenly the mosquitoes have arrived in Auckland. We haven't had them all summer, but just last night was the first time that I noticed we had mosquitoes. So I don't know whether that's a change of season or whether they just woke up because it was daylight saving. So we've got bugs up here as well.
I was going to say, we're going into winter. That's not the right time for mosses, is it?
I'll tell you what. It's been a really weird ecological year up here. I mean, it started a couple of years ago when we went into lockdown, and suddenly the bird life came back with a vengeance. I live sort of surrounded by I wouldn't say native bush, but reserve land, and the bird life just went nuts when everything was quiet. When there wasn't as much traffic around, and that's stuck around. But the bug life has been interesting as well. Yeah, we've got a lot more praying mantises, stick insects, that kind of thing, far more than I remember in previous years. Or it is possible that it's just I'm at home a lot more than I used to be at this time of year.
And things are quieter, so you notice the other noise.
Well, yeah, that's right. So you notice stuff. Yeah, that's right.
I have to say, I often think about, so I spent 40 years in Auckland, moved to Dunedin. I often think about if I'd left that thing on the bench last night in Auckland, it'd be covered in ants this morning. And you just don't get them in Dunedin.
Yeah, true.
You don't get ants, you don't get any kind of stuff. It's lovely.
Yeah, you can leave pizza out in the kitchen and it naturally is refrigerated during the night.
All right, let's get into it. Thank you, George.
You shouldn't, though, George. You know that you shouldn't do that. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, really interesting story coming up, and we want to bring to the show, as Jeremy goes sideways there, Yes, I can see Dylan. We're in the waiting room. He did the same thing, Jeremy. I think Jeremy's in a spot where his internet is average to okay. So we may have the magic of Jeremy jumping in and out as we go through the morning. But right now, there we go. Welcome back. Right now, we want to welcome to the show Dylan Reeve. Dylan, good morning and welcome to you, sir.
Morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now we can set this up, or we can just basically throw it to you, which is probably makes more sense because. There's a really interesting. Let us show them it's Substack, isn't it? Your Substack, because there's a very interesting stuff. I think it was Stuff wrote about this in the weekend, but when people start looking at it, we come across your Substack from about 2 weeks ago, writing about this as well. That there is a movement within New Zealand of quote sovereign sheriffs versus a new world order, and a very very small group of single or double figured people. Yeah. What are the sheriffs of New Zealand? Tell us what you've been seeing and finding online.
So there's a problem I'm going to face, and that is the more I talk about this, the less I seem to understand it and the stupider I feel. So we're about to crash into this issue. But fundamentally, I don't know how. Are you familiar with the sovereign citizen idea? This idea that the idea is that the government isn't really the government or isn't a valid government. Often the government is apparently a corporation, and there's various ways in which they argue this is proven. None of them are real, just to be clear. Like, the government isn't a corporation; it's a government. They're different things. But so they argue the government's not valid, and therefore they argue that there's a whole other framework of law that exists that is actually really what is the law that we're living under. We just don't know about it. And so therefore, if you do know about this law, or you could think of it like if you know about this secret magic, then you can sort of overtake the real law. You can defeat it, and you can, by uttering certain magical real common law phrases, you can get out of debts, you can not be taxed, all sorts of things. So that's that's the sovereign citizen idea.
Yeah, I watch a bunch of videos online, the auditing guys that go around and audit various groups and police stations and government buildings. It's something that isn't I've gone down that rabbit hole. And you see
the auditing thing's interesting though.
The sovereign citizens who say things like, "I'm not driving, I'm traveling.
I'm traveling. I am a private citizen traveling." Yeah, so that's interesting though, because there's like this continuum in the States, because they have this really old founding document and the amendments thereof, right? So the auditing thing is, it's all about First Amendment audits and Second Amendment audits, and so you're like the founding documents say I can do this, and so I'm going to see if people let me do it. And sometimes, people are sort of reasonable about it, and there is some pretty specific stuff in the First Amendment that's actually really great for journalism. But also some of them are just assholes trying to get in trouble. But then there's this other situation with the sovereign citizen idea where you've got this sheriff thing happening now, where people have decided that because there's this common law, that there's some legal framework by which they can appoint new law enforcers, essentially, or that they can create a new legal system. And so that's what they're doing. And as part of that, then of course they've got to have sheriffs, and then they've got to have like courts and arrest warrants and judgments and all sorts of things. And so this specific case of it is a woman in Australia named Sandra Crack, which is an amazing name for what she's up to. Has declared herself the sheriff of Australia and New Zealand for some reason, and they've removed the New Zealand government from. Well, they've somehow made the New Zealand government not relevant anymore, and they're appointing new sheriffs. And Australia and New Zealand are now under one common law, possibly with the United States. They seem to have adopted some aspects of the US Constitution for some reason. Maybe Trump is in charge. It's not entirely clear. There are some ideas that at some point there was some great stuff going around that in fact the UK had become insolvent, or the Queen had become insolvent and had sold the Commonwealth to the US government, or to either the US government or Donald Trump personally, and therefore actually Australia and New Zealand were really under the control of the US or Donald Trump personally. Anyhow, so they've got to make sheriffs, and the sheriffs then run these grand juries, they call them, in which they are both the witnesses, the judges, and the jurors. And then they issue arrest warrants, and they're going to stop the unreasonable government and the tyranny that is Jacinda Ardern, and they're going to, I don't know, arrest them, and there'll be trials.
I think it's not just Jacinda Ardern, is it? It's actually Jacinda Ardern.
Sorry, it's Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah, it's Jacinda Ardern. Now, we were wondering if that was a bit of trolling or whether that was a bit of intelligence. I noticed in a lot of their grammatical and syntax, there's a lot of errors as well. So I'm going to go with more of an indicative of the intelligence as opposed to the perhaps trolling. What do you think?
In this case, I think it is. Sandra Crack seems to write every time her name. Sandra Crack seems to write very hurriedly without much sort of care for sort of grammatical and spelling corrections. So I think that's just a simple typo situation.
Dylan, I have a question. Oh, sorry.
You go, Jeremy.
Apologies for me being back, by the way. I switched devices. I grew up in Nottingham, so we actually had a sheriff at the time.
Yeah.
We've
heard of the sheriff of Nottingham.
Yeah. So I'm actually used to this. One question I've had, and I've had this since the Wellington protests. One of the things they did on this Zoom meeting was sentence the government to death, right?
Well,
now,
yeah, I think so.
I mean, yeah, I think that was one of you may not be in a place to answer this question, but is that not a crime in this country? I remember years ago going to a protest for Mark Middleton, who was a guy whose daughter had been murdered. And he was charged because he went on a TV interview and said that he would like to kill the person who had killed his daughter. And he was charged with a death threat. Is that not a crime in this country anymore, to threaten someone with death?
I think it is, but I think the issue is, right, you're in this situation where there's a real big grey line between what is, free expression and what is incitement or a death threat. And I think the law here is in whatever someone wants to make of it, right? So if the police decide that this is a case worth taking up, and for all we know, they are investigating these people, and they may be preparing a case against them. Richard Civil, who is a sort of prominent conspiracy theorist / sovereign citizen, I don't know if he's directly involved in this particular sheriff's movement, because there are actually a couple of them in New Zealand, right. And he may not be involved in any of them. But he was arrested just a few days ago for making some sort of death threats through Telegram. He was being quite specific about, wanting to see people hung and hearing their necks snap. Oof. So, I don't know what the criteria is, and maybe police have other information about him, about whether he has some capability to do things.
Yeah, I saw there's another activist, Wellington activist, Rob Thomas, which is another great name, by the way, also the lead singer of Matchbox 20. And he was investigated for firearms recently, I think. So, we're sort of, taking the piss a little bit out of this, but, is there something a little darker? I mean, is there something a bit more dangerous going on here?
So there's a concept of stochastic terrorism, which is a big issue. And that is this situation where, there's a lot of people out there saying these things. They just put this stuff out and it doesn't mean anything. And it's all just kind of, we're just saying stuff. But that somewhere out there amongst the audience is someone who's taking this stuff seriously enough and might actually do it. And so, the Christchurch attack is kind of an example of the very worst that can happen in that scenario, where you've got someone who's taking in a lot of these ideas and a lot of this stuff about, how certain people are controlling the world or doing evil, and feels motivated to make change, as it were. And there's been a lot of examples in the States. There's been, sovereign citizens, and there's been a lot of incels and stuff who've done similar things, who've taken this information on board and then personally acted on it. And so that's the risk, I think.
You got examples of the pedophile pizzeria type thing, and someone turning up to that pizzeria with a gun and that kind of stuff. Like, I wanted to give people an example. This is from the Stuff article. There's a lot of crossover. I think they probably used your Substack as a fairly good source of information there, Dylan. But this is the jury. It says, one by one, the jury had voted to adopt the death penalty for these crimes. Days later, one of the meeting's participants, Kerry Reddy, a horse whisperer from Ikitahuna, that sounds like something that Fred Dagg would do, wouldn't it? Who calls herself the Chief Sheriff of New Zealand, posted an eviction notice on a Facebook group she administers. It warned, quote, any politicians or Ashley Bloomfield, Michael Baker, Governor General, that they had 3 hours to leave the country. In a comment, she clarified this meant that they were liable to be arrested. The post has since been removed from the Facebook group, which has more than 11,000 members. Really did not respond to a request for comment. There's that. And the other thing I was going to say, and it's in yours, I couldn't find it as I was scrolling through, but I wrote it down. When you're talking about the American influence, you're saying this is in your Substack, of one of the jury members said this. Number one, when they were asking what were the things we wanted to put in, number one would be removing the police. They no longer stand up for their oath to serve and protect. And the reason that that's an American influence is our police don't make an oath to serve and protect.
Yeah.
The American police make an oath to serve and protect. So you can just see the QAnon, incel, Trumpism, American culture flowing through this because they're actually citing US law and expecting our police to be doing it. And our police don't do that.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting thing that's happening. But so a lot of the stuff used to take place on Facebook or even Twitter and things like that. And people were kind of in their own little spaces, So the New Zealand groups kind of hung out together, and it was mostly New Zealand groups. And they have a little bit of stuff shared in from outside, but they've all kind of migrated to Telegram now. And Telegram has a lot of interesting features, but one of Telegram's sort of key features that's really relevant here is that it's incredibly easy to share content from any Telegram channel into any other Telegram channel. Right. And so what you'll find is that I'm in let's say 50 or 60 New Zealand-based channels that are predominantly speaking about either conspiracy theory stuff or COVID skepticism or something like that. And almost all of them will regularly feature content from US politics and US QAnon channels. And so there's no delineation anymore. There's no there isn't any groups that are really just single topic. They're all people are drawn in for one reason or another, but they're all feeding in. Everyone's feeding in their own pet issues from other Telegram channels, and the big ones are all, mostly American.
And I think we've seen that, haven't we? I mean, we certainly saw that on the front steps of Parliament. What started as being really generous, what started as an anti-mandate protest exploded into, there were 30 or 40 different completely disparate issues going on there. And and we're sort of seeing this in this sheriff's movement as well, right?
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about the occupation and what was sort of a convoy originally was that was a really clear example of that, in the sense that they took on this sort of populist idea from Canada. It was originally, and they in the weeks leading up to the New Zealand thing, there were just tons of posts about the Canadian convoy movement and the Canadian sort of occupation, and so that was what fed that. That was the kindling for what happened in New Zealand. And what's been really interesting is that their attempt to revive it, this 14 days of protest that is very, very poorly attended, is kind of an example of, I think, where it falls apart, right? And when you've got such a small attendance, you can't really easily ignore the fringes. If you're if you just care about, if you're a nurse who's lost their job, who just kind of cares about the mandate situation, you can't be there and pretend that it's not people screaming about pedophile cabals, because there's only 12 of you there and 2 of you screaming about pedophile cabals. So I think it needs a certain level of buy-in before you can have compartmentalization that lets you just ignore the things you don't like.
There's a critical mass, right, that needs to happen. Yeah.
And so you'll see the Telegram groups, the ones that have a small, under 100 or just a couple of hundred people in it, they tend to be much more extreme, and everyone's kind of getting more involved. Where you get up to the groups that have thousands or tens of thousands in them, there's just a lot of people who I think are watching and not really participating, and they're just taking from it what interests them. And so they're kind of ignoring the stuff. And I've spoken to a couple of people. I'm like, do you not get weirded out by the fact you're in this group that's talking mostly about vaccines, but all of a sudden someone's posting about underground pedophile military bases? Does that not weird you out? And they're like, I don't really pay attention to it.
Yeah. Right.
Because when it's large enough, you can ignore the edge stuff.
Hey, so here's a question, maybe for both of you, for anyone who wants to jump on this. If you're watching as well, you can send us a comment. These people have always been around in some iteration. It may not have been exactly what they're complaining about now. What is it about the pandemic and the vaccine that seems to have drawn them out into the public so much more. I guess you probably go Trump pandemic vaccine. There's sort of a line to drawing them out so much more publicly, to be so much more confident and comfortable with sharing these lunatic positions. And I guess, even though we may still be talking about a very small number of people, maybe, as Jeremy just said, get into that critical mass that they're big enough that there is some significant noise being made around these kinds of ideas.
Well, can I throw in a suggestion, and then Dylan, I'd like your response to it. I mean, I think the reason for this is because this is the first thing in the social media age that we've had, which is global.
Yeah, that would be almost exactly my thoughts.
Yeah, this pandemic is happening everywhere. You know, this is not Pizzagate. You know, this is not something that's happening in the States. It's not something that's happening in a particular state. This is global. So you do have this critical mass. You've got people who are complaining about this in Germany and Spain and Portugal and Greece. And so yeah, I mean that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. And you've kind of got this situation. It's not just that the pandemic is global. It's that it was global, and we were all experiencing the same thing. So you know, it's not even like, if you think back far enough to a world war or something, where, you know, it's a world war, but like the people in Europe are having a very different experience to the people in North America, to the people in Australasia. It's here, everyone is going through the same experience, and so everyone has the same anxieties, and everyone's looking for the same answers. So yeah, it just makes it a lot easier.
There's a certain irony, isn't there, that you know, one of the things that the internet said it was going to do was bring the world together as a sort of shared experience, and it turns out this is it. Great, thanks for that.
Well, and also the collective knowledge of the world, right? So that's the other thing that the internet's supposed to deliver us, and it kind of does, except you also get the collective, if you want to go looking for it, you get the collective knowledge of some people who have very weird ideas, and that's true of anything. But yeah, it's
hey Dylan, last question about this. It seems like you've done like a bunch of investigating on this and put all the information out there. Did you actually get into this Zoom? How did you actually, it looks like you've infiltrated it from the outside in, or was this just like anyone could have got in, it was public? Because these people, I think, are being exposed for some ridicule. You know, how did you get all this information? How did you get in there?
This particular instance, they posted recordings of the Zoom. I say publicly, not quite publicly, like they're in, you know, either sort of invite only kind of Telegram channels, or at least places you've got to kind of go looking to find them. Like they're not, you know, they're not on YouTube. But the stuff's not hard to find. And then once you find it, it's, you know, and once you're in also one of these spaces, it's pretty easy to get into other ones.
Right.
So I have, you know, I have sock puppet accounts on Facebook and Telegram that I use for watching various spaces. In this case, like Charlie Mitchell, who wrote the Stuff article, actually spent a lot more time watching that Zoom than I could bring myself to, because I just, you know, I'm a little bit ADHD. I can't quite deal with watching 5 hours of people talking nonsense.
You do kind of wish that these people didn't have Zoom Pro, right?
I tend to practice paying for the Zoom Pro, because one of them is 3 hours and one of them is 5 hours. I think altogether it's a little over 8 hours of 2 days of, and they're doing another one the 11th and 12th of April. They've got another grand jury happening. So two
things. Two thoughts with these kinds of people. Normally, they're either fervent and ardent believers in what they're saying, or they're grifters, and they've found a way to make some money. Yep. Are these all believers at the moment that you're seeing getting involved in these?
The sort of the motivated ones appear to be. I think there's often, you know, you'll get people who are in there for trolling, like the Facebook group. There was a couple of comments on the Facebook post that Charlie mentioned in his article, attracted sort of two types of comment. One was people supportive of the idea, and you know, wanting to know when it was going to happen and who was going to get arrested and how's it going down. And other people were people kind of making fun of them in a not super obvious way, that, you know, that they kind of bought into. So there are definitely people out there who are trolling them, and there will be certainly at different times people taking advantage of them. Like I'm assuming that, you know, someone will start selling merchandise or you know, or whatever. But for the most part, the core stuff, there's not really money changing hands. It's people believing a real thing for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And like I have relatives who've kind of gone down some of these rabbit holes, you know, who are as a result effectively bankrupt because they've, you know, written letters to their bank saying they're not the person, they're the living person, not the paper person, and they're no contract with you and stuff. It's like, there are people who throw away a lot of their lives by believing that they can just utter some magic words. So people go all in on this stuff.
Hey, just because I haven't ever said it to you before, congratulations on the Tickled movie. Really enjoyed it. It was a great thing. And I think you should do a follow-up, and it should be called Slapped, and it should star Will Smith, and you should get onto that today.
I think that I'm almost certain that whatever story there is to tell there has already been optioned.
Yeah, I think Questlove's already on top of that one.
Yeah, just from reading his Twitter. 4 or 5 productions underway on that one.
Oh, and just speaking of, if people want to find your Substack, is that a good place to go and check out your meanderings? Number 8 haywiredob.substack.com to check out. Dylan's
my theory is I'm going to try and write there sort of once a week or so about just some of the weird internet shit that catches my interest.
Cool. Hey, Dylan Reeve, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your insights into this issue at the moment.
Thank you.
All right. Cool. I mean, bit weird. Some people who are coming with some thoughts. Jason says it's all about lack of control. They can't control the pandemic, so they create a world where they are a special position of knowing something, and they can get control on how to react to it.
I think that's a very fair point. Sorry, carry on. But yeah.
Yep. Crazy says those making threats against our politicians need to be charged. The woman in Australia needs to be extradited and prosecuted. That would keep the media busy for a week or two. Yeah, it's this idea between free speech and, I guess, harmful speech, and where is that line? I mean, yeah, and I guess that's a conversation to continue on. But I don't know. I heard 50 people, and I wonder, I guess, on some level, if we're talking about it, that brings more attention to it that it needs to be brought to. But it's interesting, and it's interesting to see how and why people believe what they believe.
Yeah, well, I'm a firm believer in full disclosure, because they give them enough rope philosophy. The more you look into some of these theories, the more attention you give them. Sure, it might draw some people, but the more light you can shine on it, the more ridiculous some of these beliefs become.
Yeah. Let's have a chat about BK and what BK is up to at the moment in the UK. The BK UK and the BK. So Burger King in the UK, and I guess this must be, obviously they're a worldwide company, are trialing a new style of eatery, which is, as you can see on the sign right there, 100% meat free. Now, cards on the table, I'm not a huge fan of meat free products. If I'm going to have a burger, I like to have a burger. Always, my pedantic, petty little self always gets a bit frustrated when I see vegan sausages. I'm like, well, it's not a sausage. It needs to have meat. Yeah, it needs to have meat in it to be a sausage. And actually, I've got a conversation coming up shortly where I'm going to talk to, and I've pre-recorded this, so Jeremy, you can grab a cup of tea. Talk to Tom White, who is the owner and operator of a vegan place in Dunedin here, a burger joint. And I asked him a question that I'll throw to you, and you're welcome to pick up on it, Jeremy, is why do vegans spend so much time trying to make vegetables taste like meat?
I've never understood that. I remember the first time I had a friend of mine come around for a vegetarian friend of mine, not vegan actually, come around for a barbecue, and I say sausages, but that's what they were called. And I had the same thought. I just thought, hang on, it looks like meat. It
doesn't
apparently,
taste like meat.
Well, no, I mean, I think the newer products do apparently. Haven't tried them myself. Because I'm a bit like you. If I'm going to eat meat, I'm going to eat meat. If I'm going to eat a vegetable, I'm going to eat a vegetable. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a social thing. I mean, maybe it's in the same way that there's a huge rise at the moment. It's a really growing market in non-alcoholic drinks.
Yep.
Which look like non-alcoholic beer, non-alcoholic wine, cider. It might be a social thing. I mean, I know a lot of friends who have quit drinking who just say holding a zero Heineken, for example, at a party stops people asking them why they're not having a drink. Maybe that's the origin of this. I don't know. I'm not a vegetarian. I'm not a vegan. Never have been. Likely never will be. Like my meat too much. But I mean, I think maybe originally that's part of it, is turning up to a barbecue with an aubergine is not quite the same as turning up with a packet of bacon or whatever it is.
I saw one last night, bacon, BAKON, when I was doing a bit of research around this. Look, I mean,
go back to the BK thing. I know you're doing a pre-rec though. I mean, I've noticed we have a BK at my local mall. I don't really eat fast food very often, but I've noticed every time I've been in there that more and more their marketing. They've got much more marketing about their meat-free products. It used to be a kind of buried thing on the menu, which you could. I mean, back in the day, you could order a veggie burger or whatever it is, but it's front and center at BK even here now. I mean, they haven't gone entirely vegan like they have in the UK, but right next to the massive sign for the Whopper is a massive sign for, I can't remember what it's called,
Impossible,
but the Impossible Burger, something like that, So I mean, it's obviously a growing trend, despite the fact, interestingly, I mean, the percentage of vegans is still very, very small.
Yeah, and I think that's why some of these big companies, on some level, are just virtue signaling myself a little bit, because I mean, I know, and I talked to Tom a bit about this when we played. 2 to 3% of people in the UK are vegan, less than 1% in America. So there's not a market there to be making them all. So I think on some level it's a marketing plan and ploy. Look, I've eaten vegan because I wanted to try it out, but and I think when some people say, "Oh, it really tastes like bacon," there are people who haven't had bacon recently. Because if you have bacon in one hand and bacon in the other, and you go taste, it doesn't taste like bacon. People who think that this tastes just like meat are probably people who are in that echo chamber of this is what they eat. And now they think this is what tastes like meat. But I've seen many times, people do a direct taste test and like, well, it's nothing like it. And I also saw something the other day. I can't remember what I was watching, but it was someone who was a vegan who then, for whatever reason, they had to eat meat because they were in a situation where, I don't know, something happened. And they were like, as soon as I ate that meat, they were like, oh my God, this is so good. Because even though they're happy being vegans, they want to be vegans, they'll go back to being vegans. In that moment, they had to eat the meat. And even they acknowledged it tasted amazingly better. That's why I kind of say, vegetables taste amazing. You don't need to make vegetables taste like meat, because A, you can't, and B, it's okay to have an eggplant patty in your burger buns if that tastes great. It's all about the taste.
I will say one thing though, one thing that fast food companies are extremely good at is predicting a market. I mean, there used to be a saying in urban planning that you could tell where a new subdivision was going in because the first thing that would go in would be a McDonald's, and the second thing would be a petrol station. Because they would either have inside information, or they just they spend millions on people following trends. So I don't know, maybe they see this huge wave. Maybe they're predicting a massive wave of veganism that you and I don't quite see coming yet.
All right. Well, we'll have a look at the conversation I had with Tom. I've been to Tom's restaurant and I tried the stuff out when they opened up because I thought it was interesting to try out. I mean, it wasn't my cup of tea purely because I like meat. But I can acknowledge and see for some people it's a godsend. If you are vegan and you want to, have that gourmet burger, we've got another place in Dunedin called Reeve, which is going around the country, and it is gourmet burger, and this is 100 meters up the road from it, and it seems to be doing well, which is cool, and I applaud them for it. And if that's what vegans want to eat, I don't get it, trying to have a meat product, but I say more power to you.
That's an interesting quote you've just pulled up there. Yeah, that's an interesting point that I haven't heard before. So sorry.
It says most vegans that I know hate the food industry trying to make fake meat products. Vegetarians that I know don't care too much. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like I've eaten kind of vegetarian through my life when I was younger and in my 20s, primarily around money. Actually, lots of chickpeas, lots of veggies and that kind of stuff, and actually delicious. Loved it. Don't have a problem with not eating meat for taste, which is where I come back to. Why are so many companies trying to make vegetables taste like meat? I don't quite get it. Anyway, let's talk to the expert. His name is Tom. His name is Thomas White. He is the owner and operator of Burger Plant here in Dunedin. And this is a chat I had with him just before we started. And welcome to the show, Tom White from Burger Plant. Burger Plant is a vegan burger joint here in Dunedin. Morning, Tom. How are you, mate?
Thank you.
Let's show people your wares, shall we? So this is your website. Beautiful looking burgers. There you go. And now that this is a really dumb question. Now that whole burger that we're looking at is all vegan. There's no animal products in there whatsoever.
No, it's all vegan. Everything's 100% plant-based, which is what we're trying to do.
There you go. I mean, I know, stupid question, you're a vegan, but you look at, I'm sure if you showed that picture to someone without the context, they'll just go, "Oh, good looking burger." Obviously, they wouldn't think. I didn't think their first thought might be that's a vegan burger. So that was the reason for the stupid question. So this morning, the little thing that came up, I was interested in it, and I messaged you about it, which is obviously, how do I word this? Vegan is a lifestyle. Vegan is a way of life and ideology, a way that people want to live and eat and treat their bodies and treat the world around them. But it's also becoming, if it's not already, a more commercial entity as well. And you can see that because, you are a store in Dunedin, and you are, I guess, are you just one branch at the moment? Is that what you are?
Just us in Dunedin.
Right, because there's other kind of bespoke burger places in Dunedin that are starting to spread through the country as sort of gourmet burger. So you're one at the moment. I'm assuming the plan would be world domination from you guys. It would be the way to go.
Hopefully.
But when we look at, and I'll bring up the story here, the kind of commercial groups like BK getting into it, and this is in London. They've just started up their first 100% meat-free and plant-based store. So everything in the store is meat-free and plant-based. So it's a vegan Burger King, for want of a better word. You go, well, if they're doing it, when I've done a bit of research, it seems that between 2 and 3% of people in the UK are vegan. It looks like less than 1% of people in the US are vegan, but they obviously think there's enough of a market to do it. I'm interested as to why and what's going to happen. So from your perspective, how do you? I mean, like, not to get into your obviously financials, but you guys being a vegan burger, there you go. I just invented a new word, a burger joint, a vegan burger joint in Dunedin. Are you run off your feet? Is it like you can't keep up with demand? Is the demand for your product like flying out the doors?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I think we only started Burger Plant just before the first lockdown, so it's been a difficult kind of way to judge how the market's going to go. Sure. Dunedin's an interesting market as well. You've got students that don't really have a high level of income, so you got to price your burgers around an area that they can afford. But yeah, I think at the very start, 100%, we were. It was mental. It was crazy. It was me and 3 other staff members, and then after that, it was we got slammed with orders for probably the first 3 weeks. Like, I was every morning I had to get here like 5 a.m. to prep, and I wouldn't be leaving until like midnight. And I hired another like 8 staff in that week. And for the first year, 100%. But I think with veganism, you have a lot of people that want to try it. It's very hard to get people to completely to make us their main choice. Like, lots of people would come in and try it, and then they've gone, "Oh, well, I've done it, and that's all I'm going to do." Which is, and obviously in New Zealand, we're kind of still quite far behind on the vegan kind of ride. Like, I think the UK, the US are definitely a lot more dominating, especially with New Zealand being very agricultural focused. And I grew up on a farm. I'm supposed to be 3rd generation farmer, but I opened a vegan business instead. But yeah, I think it's just, especially in Dunedin, we're still quite southern, and it takes a little bit of change to make things happening. And I think around town now as well, when I first started, there was like hardly any vegan options in cafes and restaurants. And now if you're a cafe and restaurant and you don't have a vegan option, you're kind of missing out. But yeah, and I think it's a hard diet to kind of stick to. And I think people definitely are more leaning towards cutting down on meat consumption. And that's something that we've always been about, more so than becoming fully vegan, is definitely to promote the kind of that we don't need to have meat, 2 meals a day. We can have 1 or 2 days without any meat, and that's all good. That's the whole gist of our kind of, the way that we kind of run things here.
That kind of promotes. I'm not vegan. I have no interest in being vegan, but I do have an interest in ethically, produced food in general. So I know that in veganism and the ideology, some of it's because of taste, some because of what people want to put in their body, some of it is around the ethical treatment of animals. There's numerous reasons why people may go down that vegetarian or vegan path. But my biggest sort of confusion, like you just said meat-free days, right? Just let's stick with that. Around veganism in general, is why vegans and vegan restaurants spend so much fucking time trying to make vegetables taste like meat. Like if I'm having a meat, like I love vegetables. Like I have a huge plate of vegetables. I don't need my vegetables to taste like meat. And if I'm having meat-free days, why would I then go to a product which was a vegetable that tasted like meat? You know what I mean? Like I'm on a health kick at the moment. I'm losing weight and stuff. And I know that there's some things that I want to eat. Like a vegan might want to have the taste of meat, but I don't because it's better for me. Like I want to eat a shit ton of sugar. I want to eat a huge amount of carbs, but I'm not trying to have vegetables turn into something that tastes like sugar or carbs. And I know it's kind of none of my business really, and it doesn't actually matter. But that's always been my confusing thing. It's like if you're vegetarian or you're vegan, there's this raft of flavors amongst vegetables being vegetables and legumes being legumes and rice being rice and whatever else it is. And it seems that the thing that people want is like fake bacon. And it's like I don't quite. I mean, I understand it from a point of you want the taste of it, but I don't understand it from the side of things. Like we're just saying, a meat-free day. So let's have a burger that tastes like meat, but it's meat-free. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
you must do all the time. So what would you like to add to that?
Well, like for us personally, like the goal for us isn't like, so the way that we structure and how we design our burgers isn't so much for them to taste like meat. At the end of the day, they're never going to be meat. So why should I try and put so much time and energy into that? What we try and do is like, obviously the names are there just because if I, for instance, our cheeseburger, if I called it a Texas soy protein patty at cheese, like, it's just, it kind of sounds a bit like not as appealing, and for people to try and feel comfortable and feel familiar with things, it's really important to make sure you're going on that. But for us, it's like, at the end of the day, like I'm not like our food. The thing is for us is trying to not, have too much like flavors, and we don't add any like flavors or preservatives or anything. Everything's made fresh here. Like, we use the mix. Like we don't freeze it, like it's used in the time period that it's there. We don't buy in any meat products. We make all our sauces here. But I think, for instance, the meat stuff is it's a weird thing because it's not so much for vegans particularly. Like I feel like there's a lot of vegans out there that generally don't like the meat alternatives, and lots of people have gone vegan because they don't like the taste of meat. I think it's just more to bridge that gap between eating meat and then, because like I think if you think about it, if you don't really know how to cook or how to make something and you go, oh, I do meat and 3 veg, and I take out the meat, I'm left with 3 veg, like I've got nothing there. If you're not very creative in the way that you're going to create something, and of course having a substitute that's already similar to what you would cook meat wise, it's going to be easier. But necessarily I don't think it's a good thing. Like I think for us, we're going more a whole foods kind of market now, and I think going into the vegetarian side of things, we're going back into the severely processed foods that we used to have. Like you go and like it's just as bad process wise as what like salami or ham or anything that's really processed is going to be. So that's my kind of view on it. But definitely is an interesting one. There's a lot of reasons that people want things to taste like meat or not to taste like meat. So that's why we structure our burgers to be kind of a bit of everything. They've got burgers that are completely like chickpea based and everything, and then burgers that are kind of our meat kind of burgers to try and have as much option for people.
I assume that obviously you've got a business and you want your business to be successful and you want it to be financially good and you want to take over the world. But obviously my assumption is, and you can quickly say no if I'm wrong, but there's an ideology there as well that you want to, as you've said already, have meat-free days and give an alternative to people as well. That means I imagine you would love to see, veganism or vegetarianism or non-meat products, grow and more people participate in them. So when you see a thing like Burger King, doing an all vegan restaurant, are you excited by that because of the like the idea that you want veganism to be bigger, or are you concerned by that because, like, you know, the old story about the warehouse moves into a small town and all the small shops shut down because now everyone just goes to the big multinational? Or is there a bit of both?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen in New Zealand, to be honest.
Right.
I think we're still very behind the ball. I think purely Burger King, whatever fast food places do it purely for the trend side of things.
Right.
I don't think they really care about, like, for us, it's like we are more, it's hard because, like, even in vegan food, like, food miles a massive thing. And for me, it's like the reason that I did this was for sustainability, but any protein source that I get is from a different country because New Zealand's not set up in a way to make, you know, we don't grow soy, we don't process soy, which is like the main product that people use in vegan cooking. You know, so I mean, for me, it's kind of sucky because it's like, well, I want to, you know, support local and support our farmers and stuff and have more diversity in farms, but we don't have the facilities to do that. And I think for BK and, like, you know, I think if they do come to New Zealand with a meat-free thing, it's kind of hard. Like, I think in the UK it's definitely a lot bigger. But yeah, it's kind of like definitely more jumping on the trend of things rather than the actual issue.
I think you're completely right, and I think that's why I said at the start. Obviously, if some companies see a commercial return, they'll do it for that reason. Hey, you are burgerplantnz.com is the website. You're in the one-way systems on the left-hand side. If you're heading north, I know exactly why, because we're one of those people who, when you started up, we thought we'll give you. I mean, because I'm not against eating non-meat products in general, but we're one of those people who probably flooded you at the start and tried you out and that sort of thing. So I know exactly where you are. If people want to find out more about you, burgerplantnz.com is the website. And Tom, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for helping us understand a bit more about, you know, why people do what they do when it comes. And another day, we'll actually get into the pros and cons of being veganism. But that's not the conversation for today. So thank you for the conversation for today, and we'll talk another time.
No. Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
So there we are, and there we have it. So there's a perspective from someone in the industry, Jeremy.
Yeah, really interesting. I think one point that he made there, which I thought was really interesting, was whether or not this kind of mass-produced veganism is going to take off in New Zealand. We've seen that before with New Zealand. I mean, when Starbucks came in, they're one of the few countries in the world they really struggled because we already have a very good coffee culture.
Coffee culture, yeah.
And the more people like Tom out there who are already making, you know, I haven't tried it, but it looks good. Making quality bespoke products rather than the mass-produced products, then the harder it's going to be for one of these multinationals to come in and take their chunk of the market.
Yeah. Hey, I'd like to touch base with you on you know, the slap heard around the world. I know some people will roll their eyes as soon as I say that, but you are a professional comedian. You know, you do stand-ups, you curate and create jokes. And because of that, I feel like we can kind of look to you and use you as a bit of an expert in at least the Chris Rock part of this conversation. Before we do that, though, I want to play a couple of now there are dozens. If you get on YouTube and put comedians' response to Will Smith, you get dozens of incredibly high-profile comedians sharing their thoughts around what they have. This is one of the guys I follow quite closely, Tom Segura. I love him. I love his podcast with him and Bert Kreischer. It comes out every Tuesday. I listen to it religiously. He went on the show, the Pat McAfee show. I don't know too much about Pat McAfee, but this was his response immediately. And the thing I love about it is, you know, it takes a comedian, Jeremy, to be brutally honest. And I'll only play about 30 seconds of this, but have a listen.
Where are you at? New York?
I'm in New York. I'm wearing this hat because my alopecia's acting up.
Jesus. Okay, Tom. I'm happy you're joining us because I've been seeing you on the internet. Has this become a thing, huh? Is this what Will Smith did? Do you feel like was an attack on all comedians and maybe setting a precedent for what you can do, or jokes being not accepted in the right way?
Fuck that cuck. Let me tell you this, man.
All right.
The idea that you're entitled ass things because your feelings are hurt, you get to assault one of the all-time greats because you fucking feel, and then the cowards, the spineless cowards that are in Hollywood, in comedy. We have a list going of these fucking guys. Anybody who did not stand up and say some shit for Chris Rock, we're gonna ruin your fucking life. I just want you.
So there you go. there's a pretty brutal and honest response from Tom. And I'll just say, I'm gonna play one more part of his because he's on tour at the moment, and this is how he started his show, the first show he did after the incident. Have a listen to what he says to, and there's words that come up. If you can't quite hear it, you can read along with it.
Listen, you might hear some things that you don't like. And you will stay in your fucking seat.
We'll leave it there. He goes on to talk about he's not a good fighter, but if you come on stage, he'll bite your nose off. I mean, I find it very funny. So, and it appears that there are some comedians, and I think about, I'm not sure, is Tiffany Haddish a comedian, a stand-up, or just an actress working in comedy world? Because she's being pulled over the grate by comedians because of her support of Will Smith's actions. I'm not sure where she sits in the world of comedy, but you sit front and center with the mic on the stage, Jeremy. I'd love to get your thoughts around the whole thing, because we haven't talked to a comedian about that aspect of it yet.
Yeah, well, for a start, I'd just like to mention, I don't know if you know, Chris Rock's first line for his first show, which was like 2 days later in Boston, was, "So, hey, how was your weekend?"
Yeah, how was your weekend?
Look, I kind of agree. I know comedians, it hasn't happened to me, but I know comedians who have been attacked.
Wow.
I know a comedian who's had a gun pulled on him in a Texas comedy club for saying something. I mean, perhaps within the industry, the most famous example is Jim Jeffries, who was assaulted at the Comedy Store. I can't recall if it was in London or Manchester. I believe it was in Manchester, and it was captured on video. It went viral, and bizarrely, it really kickstarted Jim's career. Because people and you know, same thing, tickets for Chris Rock's tour have gone up in price. I'm not saying in any way that this was a stunt. But yeah, no, I mean, there's it's a really tough one. I mean, I don't know what Will Smith was thinking. I don't think it was a great joke. But I also don't think it was the most offensive joke that I've heard on a telecast, especially at an award show. And I don't know what Will Smith was thinking. I mean, possibly the most high-profile place you could possibly assault somebody is on live TV at the Oscars. But taking it away from that, in a general sense, you do get people who get angry. I mean, and that's part of comedy. I mean, you can't go into comedy expecting to please everybody all the time. That's actually not fair. Some comedians do that, and they bore the shit out of me. But you know, I've been stared down. I've had people be aggressive from the audience. I've never had actually anybody come up on the stage. And it does set a dangerous precedent if people suddenly think that's okay. It goes back to what we were talking about with Dylan earlier about the sheriff's movement. Is most people like you and I are going to be looking at this and discussing it in a kind of, you know, offhand, what a bizarre moment in history that was, television history. There may well be somebody out there who thinks suddenly this is okay to assault a comic because you don't like something he or she says. And that's a dangerous thing. I mean, we've seen it with musicians. I mean, we've seen musicians be killed because people don't like something they've done. I mean, John Lennon is a classic example. Dimebag Darrell from Pantera.
On stage.
He was on stage, I believe. Comedy is subjective, and it's not going to please everybody all the time. And if you're offended by something, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Feel free to shout out. Feel free to walk out. Feel free to ask for your money back. Feel free to write an angry email or post on Facebook. Do that. But there's a line, and it's the same line. The line isn't different for comedians than it is for anybody else in the street. I mean, if I'm walking down the street wearing a T-shirt that you find offensive, you have every right to come up and have a word to me about it. But if you walk up and punch me in the face, that's assault.
Yeah, you're going to jail.
Well, you're going to get charged, or you potentially could get charged. Chris Rock has decided not to press charges. The Academy. I agree with Tom Segura. I mean, one of the things I did find stunning about that, I didn't watch it live, but I watched the various things later, is that, what was it, less than an hour later, Will Smith wins Best Actor, and suddenly all is forgiven, and he gets the standing ovation.
Yep.
I found that really bizarre. I mean, you saw the reaction shots from people in the audience. When Mel Gibson looked shocked at what just happened, you did something wrong, okay? You know, when he's got a look on his face going, not even I have pulled some kind of stunt like that.
Hey, let me just wrap up with one thing. I didn't have this plan to talk about this morning, but just because we're talking about it,
sure.
I think the most damning criticism of Will Smith has probably come from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah, that's a brilliant article. Yeah.
Now, for people who don't know who he is, I disown you. No, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the leading NBA scorer in history. He's going to be overtaken by LeBron at some stage, but at the moment, he's scored more points in professional basketball in America than anyone else. He's won all sorts of championships. He was a part of that Lakers dynasty in the 80s with Magic Johnson. And he's now kind of turned into, he used to be Lou Alcindor, and he converted to Islam and changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he's now kind of turned into this wise sage in America, speaking to especially issues around Black culture in America.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read one part of this, because I thought if I was Will Smith and I read this, I would be devastated. This would be the thing that I think would be most devastating. So first, if you don't know Will Smith, he's a huge basketball fan. And he's actually, when he was on the Fresh Prince, I think there's a photo here, he had right there.
Kareem,
so there's Kareem on Fresh Prince with Will Smith. So this is what, and you think about Will Smith being an example to his community, an example to younger people, an example in society. This paragraph here in particular, and I will read it out. Kareem says, the Black community also takes a direct hit from Smith. One of the main talking points from those supporting the systemic racism in America is characterizing Blacks as more prone to violence and less able to control their emotions. Smith just gave comfort to the enemy by providing them with the perfect optics they were dreaming of. Fox News host Janine Pirro wasted no time going full metal jacket racist by declaring the Oscars were, quote, not the hood. What would she have said if Brad Pitt slapped Ricky Gervais? This isn't Radio Drive. Many will be invigorated to continue their campaign to marginalize African Americans and others through voter suppression campaigns. I mean, I read that and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, people look him up. His writing is terrific. He used to be a regular columnist in Time magazine. He possibly still is. I used to subscribe. I don't anymore. But he's an incredibly well thought through writer. Another point of this, which somebody pointed out, I'm not a boxing fan, but somebody pointed out that in boxing terms, Will Smith is at least 3 weight divisions bigger than Chris Rock.
Yeah.
Chris Rock is actually a really small guy. He's a little fella. Will Smith is not. So just in those terms at all, it was a shocking moment. I mean, it kind of gets lost in the fact that there's been all the jokes about it, and you know, I made a joke at the time that, you know, Kanye West must be just sitting there going, finally, I'm not the go-to meme from awards ceremonies anymore.
Wait till today though. He's up for best album in the next 3 or 4 hours. Let's see what happens today.
But taking all of that aside, I mean, it was a shocking moment. It was, it was an assault on live television, and the comedy side of it. I mean, as a comedian, it was. I completely agree with Tom Segura. I mean, it doesn't really matter the fact that Chris Rock is one of the greats, and he is. But the fact that this may open, what worries me the most is that this might open the door for somebody at an open mic gig anywhere in the world. I mean, it could happen. There's an open mic gig that runs down the road from my house, and there are comedians who get up there doing their 3rd or 4th gig, and there's a natural inclination for some certain comedians, particularly when they're first starting out, to be as offensive as possible. They think that's what comedy is. It's a really difficult thing, and people tend to learn, but you're not going to learn that if you get punched in the face. That worries me slightly. I'm not so worried about not to take away anything from Chris Rock, but from one millionaire punching another millionaire. What I'm worried about is some thug in a bar suddenly taking offense to something that some 18-year-old kid says on stage, because that punch, I mean, not to over dramatize this, but we've all seen what one punch can do. You know, the coward punch, as they call it in Australia. We've seen what can happen. So it was a shocking moment. And again, I just do not know what Will Smith was thinking. I don't understand it.
Hey, let's move on and just wrap up for the day with one more slightly lighter. Well, I think it's a lighter-hearted sort of a conversation. Daylight savings is over in the weekend. It's time to stop going backward. This is from Virginia Fallon. It's stuff. I think she writes for the Dominion out of Wellington, setting the scene for why daylight savings should disappear. It has happened in parts of America. They're taking it away. It's a really interesting and well written and funny article actually talking about young children are wanting dinners at the wrong time and cats are doing crazy things and cows are being milked at different times. But there's one part of it which is fascinating to me. Let me read this bit out to you. So this is about the clocks moving around. One study found that on the Monday following daylight savings, when the clocks move forward, losing an hour of your sleep, incidents of heart attacks increased by 24%, while another picked up a 10% increase. A 2020 University of Auckland study found that the start of daylight savings time brings significantly higher number of road accidents, especially in the first 2 days. Sunday by 16%, Monday by 12%. For each of the 4 subsequent weekdays, the rate increases by 6%. And while the health risks are highest in the days following the changeover, another expert has said some of us will spend months feeling out of sorts right up until the clocks change again. I don't know if I've ever said it to you, Jeremy. I might have, but I've long been a proponent of changing the clocks in New Zealand. And one of the main reasons, look at this beautiful country of ours, is actually the difference between over here, Gisborne, over on the coast there, and on the west coast of the South Island. If you think about how far west that is, it's actually massive. It's actually easily a time zone could be different. And if you have a look at actually, and when I say this to people who haven't noticed it before, they're quite surprised. You have a look at the westernmost point of the North Island, right, top of the North Island. That basically, if that cuts through, that's basically Nelson to Christchurch. Everywhere west of the line from Nelson to Christchurch in the South Island is west of the whole of the North Island.
Yep.
And rather than daylight savings for me personally, I've long been a proponent of the idea of maybe, just maybe, the South Island having a different time zone to the North Island, maybe just by half an hour. And that might actually solve this quote unquote problem, this issue more.
I'm with you. I agree. I mean, and look at Australia. They do that. I mean, Queensland doesn't do daylight saving. Adelaide has a half-hour time difference from Victoria. I think it's South Australia, I should say, Adelaide. I'm just talking about the cities. I completely agree with you. I don't see. I mean, I remember. I mean, I live in Auckland, but I grew up in Dunedin. And I do remember those Dunedin days where going to school when it's dark, coming home when it's dark. There you go. There's the numbers in front of you there. In Auckland, I hate daylight saving. It throws me out of whack for a couple of days, but no more than it does when I travel internationally, and you have to adjust to a different time zone. I mean, maybe one island does daylight saving and the other doesn't. Maybe there's a division line somewhere around the Murchisons. I don't know.
So have a look at this. The graphic that I've brought up. I did this morning. So this is ignore the brackets. This is the current sunrise sunsets, and I've used the extremes for the sake of the conversation. So in Auckland and summer, the earliest the sun comes up is 5:54 a.m. In Auckland and summer, the latest the sun sets is 8:43. Right. Same for winter. Earliest is 7:33. Latest the sunset the latest is 5:10. In Dunedin, the earliest summer sunrise is 5:41. So it's quite similar. 5:41, yep. But the sunset latest is 9:31. It's like 45 minutes after, yep. Right? Winter sunrise, this is the difference here. It's nearly an hour, the winter sunrise, after the Auckland sunrise in Dunedin. And actually, if you went across to the west coast, it would be different again. I'm on the east coast of the South Island, remember? The winter sunset, 5:10 in Auckland, and similar. So if we did what some people, and I'm going to say it straight, I think there's a North Island bias here from people who are making these commentaries and commentators. If we did what they're suggesting, which is to stay on the summer time, right? That's what the brackets are. The brackets are, if we stayed on summer time, then the winter sunrise in Auckland would be 8:30 in the morning. The winter sunset would be at 6:10. However, the winter sunrise in Dunedin would be at 9:20 in the morning. and the winter sunset would be at 6. I mean, it'd be nice to have the 6 o'clock. So this is what I'm saying. If this was half an hour back the other way, it would be more like 8:50 and 5:30. That feels more manageable. But at the moment, I mean, I'm not so much at the moment for me because all my kids are kind of busing and riding to school. But certainly when they were walking to school, you do have children walking to school in Dunedin. It'll be more so in Invercargill and over in Tano, and that sort of be even more so again in the dark because of how this works. And I think you could almost just have a South Island time that was half an hour different from the North Island time permanently because of how much further west we are than actually what the North Island is. And to think about the South Island standard time and the North Island standard time. So I just want to throw it out there for all these people saying we should get rid of it, that if you get rid of it on what most people are saying by staying on daylight savings, that says that at 9:20 in the morning, the sun will rise in Dunedin. Now, just north of me, there is a pretty high hill. I wouldn't call it a mountain, but it's a hill. Probably means that I wouldn't see the sun from my house until maybe 10 or 10:30 on that day, because it rises, but there's a big fucking hill in the way between the horizon and my house. So that just needs to be thought about, if nothing else. And this part of the world is pretty hilly, and there are lots of places that stay in the dark for quite a long time already without adding an hour to our winter days as well.
Well,
just putting it out there.
I hope you weren't putting it out there expecting me to disagree, because I actually completely agree with you. I think a half-hour difference would work. And you know what? Actually, looking at those times, if I don't know if you want to pull that graphic back up again, if you can, George. If you wouldn't even need to change the daylight saving if you had that half-hour difference all year round. I mean, that would mean your sunrise was half an hour earlier, but your sunset would still be at 9 o'clock at night. It'd still be later than Auckland. I mean, you could have that half-hour difference, which, like I say, is what South Australia does.
Yeah, and you're right. About if we went half an hour earlier, that means obviously the summer sunset would be 9 o'clock. The summer sunrise would be 5:10 in the morning, which was really early. But that's really, of the four, that's really the only kind of oddity. And to be honest, here in Dunedin, most people have blackout blinds, or certainly thermal blinds anyway, because of the temperature through the winter anyway. So that would be the only downside, would be a 5 a.m. sunrise. But, you know, compared to the other option, which would be a 9:20 a.m. sunrise in winter going the other way, I think that would be fine.
Yeah, it's funny. Our sort of obsession with time and the established time zones is so archaic in a way. You know, it's so based on agricultural processes from, you know, a couple of hundred years ago, and it's not really the way the world works these days. Time is flexible. Anyone who's got a clock in their car knows that.
Yeah. All right, let's bring George in because we're going to wrap up. I think we're all done. George, you still with us? Hello, sir.
Yeah. Hey,
you're a Dunedin person. What are we doing with the sunrises and sunsets?
I like what Jason's just said here about the South Island idea. I just think in terms of having a cohesive New Zealand, there might be some issues.
They do it all, but they do it all over the world. Pacific Standard Time, you know, it's all over the world. It's what it is. Look, actually, one other thing I will add in, I meant to put this into the actual main bit because, Jeremy, you're a stand-up comedian. This is what Daniel Tosh has to think about daylight savings time.
Okay, I say change from 1 to 5 hours forward, because people with 9 to 5 jobs, you've gotten so selfish and complacent with the daylight. You get it all the time. People that work at night, a third of this country, according to a survey I made up for this joke, we get robbed. It's not fair. Half the year, 5 hours forward. Means the sun's rising at noon. Means I don't feel like such a piece of shit every morning when I'm waking up. I'm like, wow, the sun's just now coming up? I might mail a letter and get groceries today. Time for me to turn this life around.
There you go. So that's a little thought from Daniel Tosh to bring into the conversation around.
This is funny. While you guys were talking, I saw Penny tweeting this here. You know what the world needs? Another opinion piece about daylight savings. I don't think there's been enough. Penny, our co-host, who we'll have later in the week.
There you go, Penny. You got what? Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
You just might get it. All right. Anything coming up for you this week, Jeremy? Anything you want to tell people about? What is happening with? Because obviously restrictions are coming off and the world is opening up. Is the comedy clubs and stuff looking more active? What are you up to?
The comedy clubs have been open for a while. I mean, they've been operating under level red. A lot of the stuff I do isn't necessarily at clubs anymore. I tend to do, and this is not a boast, but I tend to do slightly bigger events, which take a bit more forward planning. So, you know, I'm still probably a few months away from getting back to normal. But the inquiries are starting to come back in. Businesses are starting to get a bit more confidence, you know, in booking conferences, things like that. Tours are starting to go ahead again. It's kind of ironic in a way that the restrictions are coming off right now, just as like our International Comedy Festival cancelled last week, I believe, or maybe the week before. You know, and you know, you could argue that if they'd held on for 2 weeks, they might have been able to go ahead, but it's just such a gamble. I mean, you can't put on a festival of any kind without knowing, you know, 6 weeks in advance that you're actually going to be able to do it.
Very good. George, thank you for your work in today. Appreciate everything you do behind the scenes. We'll be back again tomorrow morning. I think with Chewy actually going to be co-hosting with us tomorrow morning. Jeremy, thank you for jumping in today.
No problem at all.
Co-hosting. And I think that we're pretty much done for today. And so we'll just get out of here and go and have lunch. Jeremy, thank you again. George, thank you again. Thank you for watching. Remember, share our shit. Follow me on Twitter. Follow all us on Twitter, actually, if you like. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll link to Jeremy and George in my tweets today when I put out some clips. And share it all around. That's the way we tell other people what we're up to and what we're doing, and we appreciate people who are watching and supporting us. So thank you again, and until we see you next time, bye.